Welcome to your intelligence briefing. In early February, China's National People's Congress Standing Committee formally terminated the legislative status of three senior figures from the defense industry. One of them had served as the head of China's primary nuclear weapons research institute. The official notice provided no explanation beyond the termination itself. The removal of a senior nuclear weapons expert would normally be treated as a technical or legal matter, but in this case, the way it was handled is as important as the removal itself. Shen Mingxi, a researcher at Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research, focused not on the individuals, but on their functional roles. He observed that those affected came from aviation, nuclear physics, and advanced weapons research areas directly tied to strategic deterrence and combat credibility. His assessment was careful and narrow. These are people responsible for core weapons systems. Their removal reflects more than individual discipline issues. That distinction matters. When senior technical figures are removed quietly, without public allegations or detailed charges, it usually signals that the system is addressing something broader than misconduct. Often, it points to questions of reliability of internal reporting, of performance metrics, or of institutional trust. In other words, the issue may not be what these individuals did, but what the system believes it can no longer verify. And that introduces the central analytical question for this briefing. Is this an isolated personnel adjustment or part of a wider effort to reassess confidence in critical capability domains? So here's how we're going to approach this. First, we'll stay with the official signal itself, the removal of a nuclear weapons expert, and examine what kind of institutional concern typically produces this response. Then, we'll step back and place this event inside a longer historical pattern of how internal power disputes are resolved. Finally, we'll return to a question raised by a viewer. Why, in this system, retirement is often not considered a safe or sufficient solution. Before moving forward, it's important to define what this briefing is not. This is not an assessment of nuclear readiness or military balance. It is not an accusation of wrongdoing, nor a forecast of instability. The focus here is institutional behavior, how a centralized political military system manages uncertainty when stakes are high and information asymmetry is significant. At this point, it's useful to introduce a question that came from the audience. A viewer asked me a straightforward question. Why not simply allow General Zhang to retire quietly? On the surface, this assumption makes sense. In many political systems, retirement is a pressure release mechanism. It lowers visibility, reduces friction, and allows institutional continuity without confrontation. But China's internal political history operates on a different logic. If we look back across decades, one pattern stands out clearly. Senior military figures, particularly those close to command authority, rarely exit solely through routine retirement. This is not a coincidence. And it is not about personalities. It reflects a structural concern. Proximity to power creates residual influence. Even after leaving office, individuals retain networks, institutional memory, and informal authority. In highly centralized systems, informal authority is often viewed as an uncontrolled variable. Under these conditions, retirement does not necessarily reduce risk. In some cases, it increases it. This is where the nuclear weapons expert case becomes especially instructive. Strategic weapons development is a domain with exceptionally low tolerance for ambiguity. Errors do not need to be operational to be dangerous. They can exist in reporting, modeling, or procurement assumptions. If leadership begins to suspect that internal data has been overstated, selectively framed, or structurally incentivized toward optimism, the response tends to be systemic rather than individual. At that stage, institutions face three broad options. They can preserve continuity and accept uncertainty. They can pursue limited accountability focused on discrete violations. Or they can reset trust by removing entire nodes of influence. Recent patterns suggest the third option is being used more frequently. This approach does not necessarily imply collapse or failure, but it does indicate that leadership is prioritizing control over continuity and verification over stability narratives. In such an environment, retirement becomes problematic. A retired senior figure may still speak informally, retain loyalty, or possess historical knowledge that complicates narrative control. From a risk management perspective, that makes retirement an incomplete solution. There is one additional signal that helps clarify why retirement was never a neutral option in this case. In the weeks before Zhang Youxia disappeared from public view, command leadership in the Beijing Garrison was quietly adjusted. This unit is not symbolic. It is responsible for security in the capital and for protecting the political center. The timing matters. Personnel changes in such units are rarely reactive. They are typically completed in advance and only become visible later. Several analysts noted that this adjustment occurred before any public acknowledgement of Zhang's situation. From an institutional perspective, that sequencing suggests preparation rather than response. And that distinction is important. If a system anticipates internal resistance, uncertainty, or friction at the elite level, securing control nodes comes first. In that context, retirement is not simply an administrative decision. It is a variable that must be managed. This does not tell us what was decided behind closed doors. But it does show how seriously the system treats the risk of uncontrolled influence, especially in the capital. At this point, we've laid out the reporting, expert interpretation, and historical pattern. Individually, none of these elements proves intent or outcome, but together, they outline a structural trade-off: how centralized authority manages uncertainty without dispersing control. So why in this system is retirement often not the preferred exit? Because stability is defined less by longevity and more by controllability. When uncertainty rises, influence outside formal structures becomes a risk category, regardless of service record or rank. In that framework, personnel decisions are less about punishment and more about narrowing variables. The signals worth watching next are not individual outcomes. They are systemic indicators. Whether technical oversight continues to expand, whether defense industry removals broaden across sectors, and whether official language around capability subtly shifts toward greater restraint. Those changes tend to speak more clearly than any single announcement. This has been your intelligence briefing. If you support this format, I'll keep pushing toward a more frequent cadence, while keeping the background and context deep enough to be worth your time. And for those who've asked, there's now a small member space with occasional analytical notes and early briefing access when relevant. The public briefings stay exactly as they are. There are more in-depth analyses on this situation across the channel. You're welcome to click through to watch or listen to those briefings. I'm Eric Chen. See you around.